Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. We have a great show for you today. It is May 21st, a Tuesday. I'm your host, Tommy Brzee, as always, and we have a great show. We're going to start talking a little bit about some scheduling conflicts going on between the college football playoff and the NFL. As we all know, we're getting more and more games during the month of December, and the NFL is going to have to adjust to that, and hopefully that college football will hold their ground on Saturdays, but we'll get into all that and break down my thoughts on that. Then we'll get into one of the big faces in college football going forward, in my mind, in Ramogi Huma. Ramogi Huma is a very, very talented activist for athlete rights and especially student athlete rights in college sports. So want to break down him and kind of the role he will play in the future of college football and college sports overall. Then we'll get into Oklahoma and if they are ready for the SEC challenge that is ahead. A lot of talk around them in Texas not being able to handle the physicality and the scheduling and all of things like that. So I want to break down where I think Oklahoma stands and all of that. Then we'll get into a transfer portal update before we wrap up with a Top 10 Tuesday. And today we're talking about the College Football 25 game, and I'm giving you my 10 players that I am most excited to play with in that game. So we'll break that down at the very end, so definitely stay tuned for that. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all, we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen or comment on the screen, we can have fun back and forth here, is to use the tip and donation link at the bottom of your screen, GSMCpodcast.net. It's a huge help not only to us here at the network, but to you all. You get to have a fun kind of interactive experience here, and we get to kind of learn a little bit about each other, which is always a good time. Again, that's GSMCpodcast.net. But let's jump right in, and let's talk about this college football playoff against the NFL scheduling that has been going on. As we all know, the expanded playoff is here, and the scheduling for it is going to be a little bit different. We usually have this big old gap in December where there are bowl games going on, but there's no playoff games until maybe the 30th to the 1st, whenever that kind of falls, depending on the year. That is no longer, right? You have to get through a number of rounds at this point, and they got to start pretty soon. So the way it's going to start this year is a week after the Army-Navy game, which is on December 14th. So December 21st, things will really start get going. Actually, on December 20th is when the first game will be, that Friday night. Is when the first on-campus first-round game, the ones that I think all of us are very, very excited about going into this 12-team playoff, that's when those will happen. So it's going to be, the 20th will be one game, and then the 21st you'll have a game from 12, 3:37. So the normal time slots that we usually have in college football. The issue with that is the NFL is not necessarily moving out of the way because, as we've seen the last couple of years, the NFL has started to schedule just a couple of games here and there on a Saturday once college football is over because there's less to compete with, right? And there's more time for them to kind of get a little bit more of the spotlight. And so they've started to schedule more and more games on those days. Now, December 21st is the one we're going to focus on because that's the start of the playoff and the one that the NFL uses at least to start kind of that, using the Saturdays. That's when all of that kind of really kicks off. And they have two games on that day that are going to be a little bit tough to compete with. I won't lie to you. At 1 p.m., the Texans are going to face off against the Chiefs. As we all know, C.J. Stroud took the world by storm last year and was one of the best stories in the entire NFL. So he's going to be fascinating to watch this upcoming year. The Chiefs are always appointment television. I think we all understand that at this point. And then at 4:30 you have Baltimore against Pittsburgh, and that is one of the biggest rivalries in all of the sport. That is something that you're going to be hard-pressed to find someone in Baltimore or Pittsburgh that has not fully locked into that game, among others. There's definitely going to be a lot of people that choose NFL over the college football playoff, but that being said, they're going to have to rival some pretty good college football games. We know that the playoff is going to add more teams to it, but the matchups are going to be just awesome. So we went through this probably about 2 weeks ago at this point, but Dennis Dodd, after the spring ended over at CBS, he's put out kind of his projections for the 12-team playoff and what first-round matchups we would hypothetically get. All of them were awesome, if you were to ask me. I think you start with Alabama against Notre Dame in Tuscaloosa. That would just be off the charts incredible. You would have Texas against Penn State in Austin. You would have other ones. I think you'd have Boise State and Eugene to play Oregon. Some other ones in there. So there's some really, really good games. And the good news about this is only 2 of the 4 games that are on that weekend will be affected. So you can kind of decide which way you want to play this, right? You can decide maybe we want to put Alabama and Notre Dame as the night game on the Saturday and let Texas and Penn State be the night game on the Friday. So those are the 2 that are not affected by the NFL, while putting the other 2 in those NFL slots. That being said, it can all change depending on what those matchups are and where they are and kind of how everything shakes out. But it is an interesting conversation to be had, and it's something that I think a lot of college football fans are slightly worried about. I think we've all seen over the past couple of years where college football will get in on the conversation and then the NFL will kind of override them, and it's really hard to fight the NFL, as we all know, probably the most powerful entity definitely in football, one of the most powerful in all of sports. So it's going to be hard to fight against. But the reality is Saturdays belong to college football, and that should not change. That cannot change in my mind. I think this is something, it's bad enough that we already play the championship on a Monday, and that's something that has to change. I promise you, if there's some alternate universe where I turn out to be the college football commissioner in my future, that's day one. There is no question about that. That game should be on a Saturday, but every game should be on a Saturday. Saturday is college football, and I understand you have to move one to a Friday so you can have those standalone games on Saturday, but for the majority, at the very least, they have to be on a Saturday because that is the day that all of us wake up knowing that college football is on. I think all of us, me especially, have a running routine throughout fall. It's pretty much Thursday through Monday. It is some form of football that I'm watching, and then Tuesday and Wednesday, excuse me, I'm just waiting until football is happening the next day. So all of this, my entire life revolves around football in the fall, and on Saturdays, it's all college football. And then on Sundays, I'm fully locked in on NFL, no problems there. But once you started having them overlap, you got a little bit of an issue. And now, for me, it's not that big of a problem, I'll be totally honest with you. All this means to me is I pull out another TV, get 2 going, and that's the end of the conversation. I will say the volume will be on the college football playoff. There's no 2 ways about that. But to me, it just sounds like more football, and I'm not one to turn my nose up at that by any means. So I think this is going to be really interesting to watch. I think the real hope is obviously that these playoff games don't get buried by the NFL the way that so many other things do. I mean, in 2023, 93 of the 100 most watched television programs were NFL broadcasts. So it gives you an idea of where they sit in the echelon of not only sports, but just television overall. They are the dominant force. NFL is king, as you've heard, I'm sure, a time or two. It's one of those things that the top 56 most watched television programs in 2023 were NFL games. So it's hard to fight against. There's no 2 ways about that. Ohio State and Michigan was 57th, so that is right in that realm. But when you talk about how far behind they are the massive NFL games that are ahead of them, it makes it a little bit tough. And you really hope that this is not something that carries over into this new kind of situation we find ourselves in where college football playoff games are fighting with deep regular season NFL games, because you want to watch both of them. You want them to both, get their proper shine, but also the college football playoff is just going to have to fight against this. I don't see a world where, you don't lose some type of viewership. I don't see a world where you don't lose some type of revenue from this. But the reality is, a little bit of money I'm more than happy to lose that, especially because it doesn't affect me. I don't know why anyone would be remotely upset about this if it doesn't affect your pockets, but that's beside the point. I think overall, when we talk about this, Saturdays are non-negotiable, especially for some of the biggest games in the on the calendar, especially for those games in particular. That has to be non-negotiable because Saturdays are college football. I think we all want Saturdays to stay the focal point of the sport. I talked about the Monday title game. That's a nightmare that hopefully will be fixed at some point soon. But the reality is, you're going to have to fight against one of the most powerful entities in sports. And that's just kind of the way of things. That's where you find yourself right now with the expanded college football playoff and doing it, not necessarily in lockstep with the NFL. Apparently, they reached out to the NFL. The NFL was not willing necessarily to budge from those two spots. So they just decided it was better to move forward, butting heads with them and try to figure out a way and see what it looks like this upcoming year. I'm a little bit worried with the current people that are making these big time decisions for the college football playoff that if it doesn't go great this year, they could start to pull away from Saturday. That cannot happen. If anything in the sport, of all the things that are broken about this sport, Saturday is not one of them. There's no two ways about it. Saturday are for college football. I'm more than happy to watch the NFL games off in the corner with no sound. There's no problem with that. But I'm watching college football on Saturdays. If you take those games away from me on Saturdays, you're going to have a big problem on your hands. And I'm going to be totally honest. I will be a part of that problem for the NCAA. I just cannot imagine a world where you're playing those games, especially those games that are on campus, that will have those atmospheres, that are new to this game. If you're not playing them on the biggest day of the week for your sport, you're losing the plot entirely. So I get you're fighting the NFL. I get that you're probably going to lose some viewership here. I get you're going to lose some money. It is well worth it to keep this sport where it should be on a Saturday. And then we'll get to the title game as we get there. That's something that we can fight further on. But the reality is right now, hopefully that this is something that just becomes normal world where we have those college football playoff games, but we also have some NFL games to watch from time to time or check in on when the other games are on commercials. So I'm not opposed to this. It just sounds like more football to me. I am slightly opposed to the people that could be making the decision of whether this stays the case in the future, but at the end of the day, hopefully we stay put and college football stays on Saturdays, especially for these games, because it's absolutely essential to what the college football playoff is going to be and what college football needs to be going forward. So it's a little bit of a battle. It'll be interesting to see kind of what those numbers look like once all of this kind of comes to fruition, and if the NFL really does bury the college football playoff, if the college football playoff takes a big chunk out of the NFL and maybe they decide to go back all the way into Sunday. So who knows what's going to happen with this. Personally, I hope for the latter rather than the former. I hope the NFL decides to rethink, but as of right now, you have it on a Saturday. It's just got to stay that way. That's for sure. But that'll do it for this segment. When we come back, we're going to talk about Ramogi Huma, a very, very talented student athlete activist that has kind of taken the world by storm a little bit the last little bit and has been a big time name in college football. So I want to break down first of all who he is and also the big time part he could play in the future of our sport and every college sport. So stick with us and we will be right back with that.